asking for permission to record. This will be recorded. You'll get a link to the recording and the slides will be sent to you after the show. You're welcome to type questions in the chat box as we go along. Or at the end of the show, you can unmute yourself and ask questions. I will stay as long as you like afterwards to answer any questions you have. The show itself should be about 30 minutes long. So for a lot of medical association meetings, conferences, or symposiums, submitting an abstract is the first step to getting accepted to do a poster presentation or an oral presentation. So we're going to focus on writing the abstract that you initially submit. We'll start by briefly discussing the main parts of the abstract, and then we'll talk about tailoring your abstract to a particular conference, and we'll look at some guidelines for upcoming conferences as examples. The parts of a conference abstract are generally the same as those for a journal article in most cases. You have a title, you'll have the author's names, your affiliations, and the main sections, which are in most cases are the background, which may be called the introduction, the methods section, which may be called materials and methods or patients and methods, the results, and the conclusion. Usually the conference's submission guidelines don't specify exactly how you should name your headings, but always check the guidelines to make sure. And you will be hearing me say that a lot. Check your conference's guidelines. So the background section is usually short. The main information it should include is the rationale for your study, the reason you did it, and that should include the gap in knowledge that your research is trying to fill. And you state your hypothesis or purpose statement. And this should be very clearly written, as in, we hypothesized, blah, 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 or the purpose of our study was blah, blah, blah. It should have the word hypothesis, hypothesized, purpose, or aim to make it clear to the readers that this is why you did what you did. The methods, of course, will describe your experimental approach. You can't go into a whole lot of detail, but in general, a basic science study should talk about the main materials used, like a particular cell line or a particular type of mice, or in a clinical study, it should include the patient's description, what type of cancer they had, were they in a particular age range? Was it patients with advanced cancer or newly diagnosed early stage cancer? What interventions or treatments did you give, and what were the main endpoints you were looking at? And then the results will state your main findings. When you're writing your results, you want to look at your methods section and make sure that for each experiment or intervention described in the methods, you give a result for that experiment or intervention. Likewise, after you've written your results, you want to make sure that every result you gave is mentioned in the methods of what experiment or analysis you used to get that result. You want to avoid dumping a whole bunch of raw data. You want to summarize the data instead. And you want to make sure you get the results you give support your conclusions. And that conclusion statement should be drawn from the results. In other words, it shouldn't just repeat what you found. It should say how these results answered your hypothesis or your purpose statement. Did they achieve your purpose? Did they support your hypothesis or refute your hypothesis? And then you specify those implications. Why is this important? If it's a preclinical study, the implication may be that this whatever you're doing may need to be explored in clinical studies. It may be a potential cancer treatment. If you didn't support your hypothesis, the implication may be that whatever you were trying to do works through a different pathway, and you may suggest alternative approaches that may need to be explored. And you may or may not be able to include tables or figures. Some conferences will allow you to send one table or one figure, usually not more. The important thing is that a table or figure will show data that's not repeated in the text or information that's not given in the text. Like my very oversimplified example here, if your figure shows response to treatment with immunotherapy, or a combination in mice, your results in your abstract shouldn't say mice treated with chemotherapy only had a 20% response rate. Those treated with immunotherapy only had a 31% response rate, et cetera. You should just say the response rates are shown in figure 1. And the figure table should be easily understood without referencing the text. Remember, readers' eyes are going to be drawn to the figure first. So you want to make sure that they can get a clear idea of what's going on in the figure without having to look back at your text to understand abbreviations given or something like that. And of course, you should follow the conference's submission guidelines, particularly for figures if there's a particular file type they want. The guidelines will also tell you how your table or figure is going to count towards their length requirements. A table or figure will most likely be used to describe your results, but it could describe your methods, especially if you're reporting a new process or a new technique, or if your abstract is about a new protocol for which results aren't available yet. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And you've likely already got more than one table or figure ready if you're planning to submit the abstract in hopes of being accepted to present a poster, for instance. In this case, you should choose the table or figure that describes your most important finding. That is, the finding that your main conclusion is based on. Now, for the sections we've shown here, the length is going to vary, but generally the methods and results will be the longest because that's really where the meat of your abstract is. This is what's most important. And again, if you're describing a new technique, you'll devote more space to the methods. You want to use as few abbreviations as possible and avoid non-standard abbreviations. Furthermore, abstracts almost never have a reference list, but you can cite abstracts parenthetically. As we see in this example, this is an excerpt from an abstract presented at the American Society of Hematology conference in 2022 by a group of MD Anderson authors. They're reporting follow-up data from a clinical trial, and they cite 2 previous reports that were published in journals about that same trial. So they just do that in parentheses, first author, and then the journal name and the year. And if you're going to go on and make this into a poster presentation, at that point, you might want to change to numeric citations and a numbered reference list if you've got 2 or 3 references or more. Now, it's worth noting that your abstract might describe proposed research, such as a clinical trial that's in progress, but for which we don't have results yet. These typically report the background and methods section with quite a bit of detail in the methods. Instead of results, you might add a heading such as outcomes of interest or expected outcomes. You want to make sure and see the conference guidelines. A lot of them will have specific guidelines for a trial in progress. These came from the American Society of Clinical Oncology. And when you look at the conference guidelines, if you're not sure, they don't seem to cover this type of abstract, don't hesitate to call or email them. They'll have contact information there somewhere about the conference. So it's better to call for verification than to find out there's a problem with your abstract later on. Now we're going to shift our focus to tailoring to a specific conference, because with any type of writing, you want to consider your audience, and these conferences have slightly different audiences. For example, say your paper has something to do with breast cancer surgery. You might want to send the abstract to American Society of Clinical Oncology. And their audience will include some surgical oncologists, some who aren't surgeons, some who are surgeons but don't specialize in breast cancer. Or you can send it to the American College of Surgeons. Some of them will be cancer specialists, some of them will not be. Or you can send it to, say, one of the breast cancer symposiums, like the San Antonio Breast Cancer Symposiums. These are breast cancer specialists, but not necessarily surgeons. Or you can send it to an audience that has the same specialty you do, such as the American Society of Breast Surgeons. The audience you choose will affect how you structure your abstract, or more importantly, what details you give where. If you're a breast cancer surgeon and you're submitting to the American Society of Breast Cancer Surgeons, you don't need to explain as much, say, about a standard breast cancer surgery, because you can assume that if you just give the name of it, surgeons will understand. If some of your readers are not breast cancer specialists or surgeons, you may give just a little bit more detail about what you mean when you're talking about a lumpectomy or a partial lumpectomy or some such. So you might have to define a little bit more in your methods, or give a little bit more background information so that these people who aren't in your area will understand what the purpose of your research is and why it's important. And when you've chosen your conference, make sure you thoroughly read the submission guidelines, because failure to follow them can cause your abstract to be rejected. The first thing you want to do is make sure they're interested in your topic. And they will list with varying degrees of precision exactly what type of papers they want. Some will be general, some will have a long list of categories, and we'll see that in our examples later on. But just in a general example, ASCO's 2023 guidelines said they don't accept case reports. So that tells you right off the bat, if you've got a case report, they're not the place to go. You also want to make sure that your abstract can fit within the length limit of your conference. And of course, there's information in the guidelines about application fees and registration for the conference itself. And now we're going to look at a few examples. And I am going to stop sharing this screen really quick and start sharing my other screen. Okay, here we are. Sorry about that. Okay, now you should be seeing the website for the American Association for Cancer Research. All right, these are the guidelines for their upcoming conference in April 2024. When we go through here, we can see that they give you pretty much everything you want to know. The format, their information about their submission systems, all about authorship, all down the road. And then we get to one called abstract categories. And I've already opened this window. Here we see that they go into a lot of detail about all of their categories. There's very broad categories. Then within each broad category of bioinformatics or chemistry, they have subcategories. And within those, even smaller subcategories. So you can see very clearly where your abstract should fit within this long list. And as we go down, you can see it's a big conference with a whole lot of categories. Back to their main screen, we have information about deadlines. That's very important. And often you'll see the regular deadline and the late breaking deadline. So if you're doing, say, a clinical trial and you won't have findings until the end of the year, you're in luck for this conference because you can submit them up to January 8th. And then you go on to a lot of detail about the conference. For instance, the AACR requires you to be sponsored by an AACR member. And it goes through all the details of how that should happen. Let's look at another conference, the American College of Surgeons. In contrast to the AACR, the ACS is very general in their guidelines. They want a brief description, not even the whole abstract, but a description of it. And then this is their list of topics. Instead of multiple pages and multiple categories, like the AACR had, the ACS just has very broad categories. And then, of course, you've got your deadlines and a link to the submission portal. And one more, we'll look at ASCO, American Society of Clinical Oncology. This one is interesting because their 2024 guidelines are not up yet. The meeting's not until May, the end of May. So when you click on the 2024 guidelines, they give you a link to the 2023 requirements. In this case, you can go ahead and follow these guidelines when preparing your abstract, the very general stuff. And then you can note the author's responsibilities, for instance, the submission requirements, and then make a note to check once the 2024 guidelines are up to make sure you're in compliance with those and that you've got the due dates, et cetera, noted. And then There's usually a contact us, or always in some point, a contact us email link. And if you've got questions, it's better to ask them than to just take a guess and wind up, say, having an abstract that doesn't fit in the category that they want or doesn't seem to. You want to be able to clear up any possible misunderstandings beforehand. So once again, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, go back to my slides. With any luck, we'll get there. And I'd like to close up with a few resources that can help you with your abstract writing. The first is a video of how to shorten an abstract. If you're over the submission guidelines, this video can help you find ways to condense your writing, either by focusing on what's most important or by tightening up your sentences. It's very well done by one of the editors here in the Research Medical Library. The second is a blog post from the American Medical Writers Association, and it gives general tips about abstract writing. And of course, in my humble opinion, the most valuable resource that you have available to you is the Research Medical Library itself. From the editor's point of view, you can contact the editors either by requesting a consultation on the website, or by calling the library's main number, or by emailing either the RML-Help or the RML editing at mdanderson.org. If you want a consultation, an editor can talk to you about any aspect of writing. You can also submit a draft of your abstract or a draft of your poster presentation to RML editing. Abstracts and posters are usually short enough that we can give them to our on-call editor, who will get them the same day or the very next day. Of course, longer projects like research paper take quite a bit more time to get turned around. But don't hesitate to contact the library if you need help with your abstract. And that is all we have. I'm going to stop recording and answer any questions that you've got.